Hi there, I've come across a request from one of my dear viewers to render the likeness of Shakai Sun, the Bladepotter, a name which I'm sure a few of you will recognize from the early days of my videos, which I'll love to get into in just a second. If you haven't seen my content before, this series is a world-building project for a fantasy world ruled by goblins, called Gobberland. It's created by names that viewers leave in the comments section of my videos. From those names, I create a character design as well as some lore around the character, usually in the form of a few paragraphs or of a story tying them all into the same universe. For several years now, I've been building this world on TikTok, but recently I've started making long-form content on YouTube. In order to help me get my footing on here, I would really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, or maybe even comment a name for another character for a video. This actually isn't the first time I've drawn Shakai Sun. In fact, he was one of the very first goblins I ever drew and wrote lore for. Here though, I thought it might be interesting to redesign this beloved character in a response to the same viewer who wrote the original prompt several years back on TikTok. When I first started to do this series, I was taking these character designs a lot less seriously, and for the most part, I was just using these videos as a chance to draw some funny looking guys and write some fun lore. Over time though, I really enjoyed putting genuine effort into making good-looking and conceptually interesting character designs, which left some of my earlier designs, including Shakai Sun, looking a little bit lackluster. So, in beginning this reimagining of the Bladepotter himself, I figure it might be helpful if I give a bit of background on this guy while I start the redesign process. Shakai Sun is a member of a larger category of magic users in the universe of Gobberland, which study the field of artisanal arcana, known as artisan magicians, who in their magical practice incorporate spells into physical creations to enhance the properties of the creation or to impart new magical abilities. Among their number include Tindlewick Tallowhands, a magical candle maker, or Thulnai Mun, the walking kiln, a high gaffer of the arcane glass rites. Shakai Sun's own craft lies in the creation of ceramic blades. Through the meticulous layering of magical slips and glazes, he's able to achieve an impossibly sharp edge, capable of slicing through any material. These blades still retain the properties of ceramic, however, meaning that any misaligned cut will shatter the blade. As such, only the most skilled of sword scobs may use these blades, themselves belonging to an elite order known as the Clay Knights. As you can see, we've made a bit of progress on the design here for this lovely lad, just getting to the end of this initial sketch. For this piece, I wanted to move forward with a couple things in mind, though specifically the balance of achieving a regal aesthetic while depicting a blacksmith, which is quite an unregal profession. This character is at least partially immortal and is one of the more powerful magic users in this universe, so I think it would be appropriate to give him a bit of a majestic air. An issue that I start stumbling into here, though, is creating an interesting composition. I knew I wanted to show Shakai Sun in the process of creating one of these swords, but I had no clue the best way to do so. My original thought was to show him applying the magical glazes by hand in a way that would coat his whole arm, encasing the limb in this material, giving him an epic magic hand. While I still think this idea is really cool, I just could not figure out a pose where he could be reasonably shown doing this, while also still looking regal and interesting. This is one of the more difficult parts of combining lore and character designs, I think. Even though a concept might sound cool, there's a very good chance it just does not look cool. To an extent then, it's the job of the character designer to figure out a way to make it look cool, but at a point you also just need to kind of come to terms with killing an idea if you can't figure out how to make it fit your vision, which is what I end up doing. So here in this final sketch, I gave him a little carving tool so he can make all these cool little patterns on the blade, which presumably lend some sort of magical effect. As I was working on all these different sketches, I realized I needed to also change his silhouette a bit and give him a bit more personality. As such, I figured it might be fun to drape a little cloth around his head like a shawl. In the original piece, he almost seemed to have a bit of a brooding expression, looking off into the distance. So I also have him peeking out from under his brows, scowling like even though he's been making these blades for an eternity, he absolutely hates doing it. Around here, you can see me starting to pour detail into this gob's build, emphasizing veins and wrinkles and muscle striations, really just trying to embody the concept of old man strength. The way I figure, if he spent countless lifetimes working with these materials day after day after day, that labor should be visible in his form. Just putting the finishing touches on the line work now, fleshing out his outfit a bit more, as well as the carved designs on the sword being made. Only an armband, belt buckle, and these long plates of some metallic material. I figure they might be made of gold or bronze and are used as a type of currency or display, maybe even a type of armor, as those ridges should do pretty well at catching a strike from a blade. Maybe they're bars of ceramic that have already been fired. Regardless, I thought they just went well with the billowing half robes he's wearing. I was really trying to nail down that regal aesthetic, going for something almost priestly. Nothing that should get too in the way during his work, but also not just cheap rags. Finally now, after I don't know how many sketches, we're able to move on to color, which for some reason I didn't make any easier on myself. I'm actually somewhat inexperienced with digital painting, so I've been using this series as a way to improve those skills. With this piece, the main element I wanted to focus on with the coloring is this really dramatic lighting setup brought about by the figure standing over this magical brazier. For the first time, I began to explore the different blend modes within Procreate, the program that I use for these pieces, trying to figure out how to implement them in a natural way and to the benefit of the piece. Of course, this did stretch out the timeline for this design a bit, which explains my admittedly not great posting schedule. But in the end, I think the final result was quite satisfying. I've always really enjoyed working with highlights and shadow, and this just brings that field up to the next level. At this last stage in the piece, I'm adding some finishing details, including some designs for other clay swords in the background. I wanted to follow relatively similar concepts with each one, centering around them being large, slashing weapons with weird and funky designs, just barely hovering the line on functionality. I imagine that like any artist, Shakai Sun might get tired of doing the same design over and over again, and chooses to get a little bit funky with it. As different as they are, I chose to make each one of them with the same motif, a large ring that makes up the pommel of the sword. I just think it's a fun and funky visual element, which I had in the original clay razor designs I made way back. My main inspiration at the time for these was actually the sword designs in a game called Kenshi, which was and still is one of my favorite games of all time, in large part due to the art direction and lore. With that though, we've reached the end of this design, and now may hear the story of the Bladepotter. Shakai Sun and his clay razors are known far and wide. One of the last great artisan magicians for an age, Shakai Sun has lovingly crafted some of the best weapons known to Gobkind, painstakingly layering countless spells in between coatings of slip and glaze. He's able to create ceramic blades that surpass any other material in sharpness. However, these weapons are shatteringly fragile, and any cut not perfectly aligned will cause it to explode violently in a shower of shards. Based on this, it seems that these blades would be extremely impractical, and for most gobs that would be true. Only the most skilled swords gobs can truly wield a clay razor, and the ones that can are feared by all. When handled correctly, the ceramic blades can cut through any material known, shearing through swords, shields, and armor with nothing more than an eerie and ear-splitting high-pitched whine. The Bladepotter began his craft long ago, when the wealth of iron below these lands was yet untapped. An already legendary ceramicist, Shakai Sun was called upon by his liege to craft weapons of war. The boredom of peacetime had worn on the despot, lust for the wealth of neighboring lands blinding him. He ordered all craftsgobs of his realm to forge weaponry to arm his levies. Masons and carpenters, cobblers and tanners, all were drafted to do their part in outfitting their lord's troops. By what chance did he recruit even a potter such as Shakai Sun, it is unknown. Perhaps whoever had enacted his orders had feared him too greatly to question details, and by the letter of his word, alerted truly all craftsgobs to their task. Shakai Sun, loath to endanger his livelihood, set to the task to the best of his ability, At this point, he had only minimally delved into the arcane aspects of ceramics, usually only to enhance the brightness of colors or to reduce the chance of a piece prematurely cracking in a kiln. Seeing the job before him, though, he knew that more must be done. For days, he labored in his workshop, assistants carting in the highest quality clay that could be found at the river. Great kettles of slip were mixed for hours, chants droned over them the entire time. Impossible swirling colors were pulled from dead clay in the heat of the kiln. Shakai Sun fell deeper and deeper into his work, in ecstatic love with the process, reveling in greater and greater results. He breathed in the magic of his art, his being infused with the dust of the clay. At the end of 3 weeks, 8 clay razors were presented as the culmination of his effort, each nearly the height of a gob, each more magnificent than the last. His liege scoffed at the quantity of weapons given for this length of time, yet still granted them to 8 of his strongest warriors. In battle, these soldiers excelled above all others and turned the tide many a time. Realizing the power that these weapons held, the liege lord pressed Shakai Sun into near constant work, producing blade after blade. At the start, he relished the honors heaped upon him, though as he saw the bodies pile up, the burning of towns on the horizon, regret seeped into his heart. He pled with his liege to stop the wars, though for his efforts was only imprisoned in his workshop. One day, 2 of the bearers of these swords came to him, eager to meet Shakai Sun. Their numbers had grown immensely, over 8 score of them now, each with a reverent respect for their weapon, and a fanatic dedication to the now mythical Bladepotter. Having met him, though, these 2 were dismayed to find their glorious prophet of clay and blood locked in a dim stone hut, chained to his workbench. Shakai Sun felt shame at their leaving, to have disappointed them so. The next morning, however, he was shocked to find on his doorstep all 163 of their order, newly dubbed as the Clay Knights, eager to liberate their patron. They marched up and through the gates of the Lord's Hill Fort, any opposition swiftly and mercilessly cut down by impossibly sharp blades. In the great hall, Shakai Sun met the fearful eyes of his former liege and didn't avert his gaze, as the gob was cleft in 2 with remarkable ease. The Bladepotter took the high seat, his clay knights helping his weakened form into the throne. He relinquished control over the surrounding lands, but kept his knights in his service, vowing to never have his craft be taken advantage of again. The entire fort was gradually turned into one great workshop, now known as the Clay Forge, which also serves as the headquarters for the Order of Clay Knights, a military body which works no longer to conquer, only to protect. Atop that hill, Shakai Sun still crafts his ceramic blades, for he must yet guard himself from the greed of kings. After all these centuries, though, the only thing he wants is to go back to making simple crockery.